Good evening, everyone. My name is Maggie, and on behalf of Book Soup, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us for our virtual event this evening with Joshua Coombes in conversation with Paul Avila discussing Do Something for Nothing. We're so excited and grateful that our bookstore can continue to bring authors and their works to our community during this time. We'll be hosting more virtual events in the near future, and you can learn about them on our website, booksoup.com, as well as our social media at BookSoup. Our next event is Tuesday, May 25th with Kristen Hirsch in conversation with Kathy Valentine discussing Seeing Sideways, a memoir of music and motherhood. To submit a question during the event, please use the Ask a Question button at the bottom of the screen. If you'd like to see a question on the list, if you see a question on the list that you'd like our speakers to answer, please click the like button. We'll try to answer as many questions as time will allow. Please do not use the sidebar chat to ask a question. Support our bookstore and our authors and purchase a copy of tonight's featured book. Just click the green purchase button that says Do Something for Nothing directly below the viewer screen. The link will redirect you to our website where you can continue your checkout process. We're also selling digital audiobooks and ebooks through Libro FM and Kobo for those who are interested. A little more about Joshua. Joshua made headlines for his work styling the hair of homeless people across the globe. At first, Joshua began taking his kit out on the streets after he finished his shift at a salon in Devon, and now he travels the world, teaming up with other like-minded individuals to make a small difference in the lives of people who live on the street. A little more about Paul. Paul is the founder of Polly's Project, which he created in 2013. Polly's Project is a nonprofit organization which gives music to the homeless by providing headphone sets. Without further ado, I'm going to turn the camera over to Joshua and Paul. Enjoy the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And thank you to everyone for being here today. The people we've got online here, we're really grateful for you tuning in and taking part of this event where we'll be talking about, well, a few different things, but big thanks to BookSoup, first of all, for getting this message out there and for hosting us. And talking a little bit about this book, Do Something for Nothing, which has been published in the UK this week. And I wanted to start by, well, first of all, saying hi, Paul, because it's so great to be here with you and see you from afar. We'd usually do this in person on the streets, but I think to kick off, it might be nice just to have a bit of an introduction in the work we do and why we got into what we're doing before we delve in a bit deeper. So perhaps I could ask you first, like, Paulie's Project, like, how did this begin for you? How did it get started and everything?
Yeah, no, definitely kind of dive right into it. But yeah, first I want to thank Josh for getting me on here and sharing our journey. And I'm just so inspired by your work as well. And got my copy right here. You definitely got to pick this up. It's an amazing book. We'll talk about that later. But yeah, no. So long story short, Polly's Project started about 9 years ago, and it was inspired by my blind and autistic son, Paulie, and his love for music. So Paulie's 24 years old now. He cannot see and he cannot talk. Again, blind and autistic. All he can do is hear. So we found out at a young age that music really calmed and soothed him, So going back in time again, 9 years ago, I would do a lot of volunteer work in the streets of Los Angeles, in the Skid Row, homeless community. And I remember one day we were serving breakfast and I was walking back to my car and I saw this guy with headphones on and he was just dancing to the music and smiling. And it was like something hit me. It was like he had the same smile that Paulie had. So I went home that night and I was like, all right, something was, touched my heart. I said, how do I connect music, Paulie, helping the homeless? So I said, you know what, let's start something called Polly's Project in honor of Paulie and sharing the gift of music. So me and Paulie would go down there, donate radios, and a lot of our homeless friends, who never met Paulie would say, why isn't he looking at me? They didn't understand his situation. I said, well, he's blind, he can't see. And why isn't he talking? Well, he's autistic, he's never spoke. And Paulie would hand him the radio and they were just like amazed. They're like, wow, who am I to complain? Yes, I live in this tent, but this young man, can't see and talk and he's donating to me. So, we'll get into more details later, but fast forward, to now we have a full blown, nonprofit organization. We have tons of volunteers and we go out every other Sunday and to give back to the homeless community. So that's kind of the short version of it.
Yeah, that's great, Paul. Thank you. And it's why really I was so happy to be able to connect and talk to you about this stuff today. And for me, I got introduced to the work that you do, and I was immediately kind of inspired from afar and read about your story. But then obviously, I was able to meet you in person probably about, well, I guess about 3 years ago at first now, maybe even 4 years ago when we first connected and went out on the streets. And that was when I was on one of the first times I came over to Los Angeles. And obviously I was made aware of the homeless situation there. But for me, that started in London, obviously, like where I, I was living. I have lived for quite a long time now. And, even though obviously it's different, like, of course, in Europe and the way things might look on the streets here than it is in the US. But I think there's so many similarities too, which is, I feel like the reason I got into the work that I do is that, I was working in a hair salon where I was cutting men and women's hair, and I had a clientele, and I was, pretty busy and enjoying my job. But every time I'd finish work, I'd walk by somebody on the way to my train station to get home, or outside the supermarket, somebody who was sleeping rough, as would say over here, or experiencing homelessness. And it was just this part of me that I was doing what I could, which was maybe buying someone a hot drink or giving them some change. But there was something lingering in me that I wanted to be able to interact with this issue in a way that I felt more connected. But I felt like I needed to get beneath the surface of this in some ways, because I suppose my perception of homelessness and this word that it covers like millions of people worldwide, but the images sometimes on the mainstream media over here and the articles I was reading, it was like these statistics that kind of are pretty scary, and they don't really make you feel any more connected to people's lives and what's going on behind like these numbers that you see. And being really honest, they were only on the rise as well. So I used to think like, God, like, how do I, as one person, begin to try and like affect any kind of change? Like, what do I do? And I want to be really honest. I actually wasn't sure. I'd say hi and I'd have a chat, but it was never longer than a minute conversation before I'd be on my way. And I suppose that was because initially there was this internal dialogue I used to kind of play over in my mind of saying hello and how are you, and like giving someone a smile. I was like, is that going to be taken the right way? And like, is that really going to make a difference to someone's day when someone's clearly like not in a very good position? But thankfully that all changed for me one day. And I was able to sort of get a lot closer to this. And that was through what I do, which is cutting hair for people. And I had my things with me, and I was on the way somewhere to cut someone's hair at their house. And I ended up meeting someone who was on the street, and I asked them for a haircut instead. And in that moment, it was, it was that time I needed to really get to know that person, to hopefully like make them feel good with a haircut. But more than anything, it was these light bulbs of like, oh, wow, actually, I was thinking about this the wrong way. Okay, of course, I don't know the solution to this overnight, but I've got to be able to interact with these humans who are just like anyone else. And the more I did this, the more stories I heard. And then that's how Do Something for Nothing began, which has now ended up as images in this book and different stories from different places. But it started in London. It started with my backpack going out and just listening to people,
Yeah, definitely. No, I think like you said, it's just, there's always that little tiny seed that gets planted and it just blossoms from there. And, maybe just you taking the time, and like you said, if it's from the UK to LA, different scenarios, but ultimately it's the same compassion that we all share, that's common ground, and, for me, going back to my backstory, which I talked about, the birth of Polly's project, but what even started before then was an uncle I had, and he'd always be in and out of prison, hardcore gang member, grew up in Los Angeles. And when he'd get released from prison, he'd go to Skid Row, and we always tried to get him help. And he said, you know what, just leave me alone. You can help from afar, but just don't get caught up in my world, and he was doing drugs and alcohol. But my mom would take me down to Skid Row, and we'd bring my uncle, cigarette cartons and hygiene items and clothes. And I think it just touched my heart. I was 5, 6, 7 years old and just looking around in this area. And I said, man, it's so scary. And back then Skid Row was a lot smaller, but as I got older, since then my uncle passed, and I said, I want to go back to that same area now that I'm an adult and just make a difference, do whatever I can, and, there comes along Polly and the whole backstory. So that was just the seed that was planted. So.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to ask you, because obviously that was my connection to like into the work that I got going with. But for you, you know, I mean, having visited Skid Row like many times now, and I think, you know, regardless of how many people might be in this room right now, you know, when we put this video out afterwards to people, I think a lot of people relate to different cities in America. You're going to have these tent encampments that you see, and usually it's kind of in a certain area of town. It's all concentrated, I find, to like one area. Usually, you know, there's a few different areas, and especially obviously like in a LA County, that you're going to find many areas. But Skid Row, we'll focus on that for a minute, which is of course like quite an infamous place now, really, from lots of reports from the media and so many reports and articles I've read. But you've got this 30 to 50 block radius of basically a tent city where lots of streets are full up with tents. And like, I suppose, how many people just drive through them and just, you know, just that's their only experience. You know, they just see it through the car window, through the bus window. And I find, especially with the driving culture in Los Angeles, and it's like a lot of people are in the cars a lot of the time. So, you know, what was it in you that kind of, you know, from the kind of the perception that you could have had from outside, and I know obviously you have this lived experience with your uncle, was there, do you remember that day you went back down there? Like, how did you just get out your car one day and start talking to people when, you know, when Paulie's project began?
Yeah. I think you touched on it. LA is such a busy place, and we're almost numb to driving by these invisible people. You know, it's like a lost society. And I think, like you said, people used to drive through Skid Row, and I think that used to bring some awareness, because you can't just drive through it and think it's normal. I mean, it's not normal. But now people don't even want to drive through it; they're scared. And Skid Row's 54 blocks, so it's huge. You know, I think right now the homeless count in LA County is up to 67,000, which I know those numbers aren't even right. I'm sure it's way higher than that. But yeah, it was just, you know, making a decision that instead of just driving by these people, what can I do to help? You know, it just takes each and every one of us to do something. So it just started with serving breakfast, you know, downtown in Skid Row. And, you know, it just, like I said, blossomed from there, and we started our project. But yeah, I just didn't want to be that person like so many that just complain but don't really do anything about it. Because at the end of the day, it's always like politics. Oh, we don't like the mayor, the this, the that. It's like, well, that's sometimes not going to change, but what can we do to make it change? You know, I'm not waiting for the politicians. I'm going to go on the groundworks, and I think that's my specialty. You know, it's like with all the jobs I've had in my life, it's like I've sat down with, you know, $1 million investors to a street alley, some guy doing crack in front of me. And so I have that gift that I can just adapt. And I think with my son, you know, again, him not being able to see and talk, and I feed him and change his diapers and bathe him and stuff. So when I go out to the streets, to me, I'm not really doing anything special. It's in my heart. I'm a caregiver. So it just comes hand in hand. And I think that's just who I am.
You know, I think that's a really interesting point to touch on what might be, I guess, the barrier from people who've never worked with this and might not kind of have that lived experience that you have. Because obviously, you know, there's I suppose people who could go, you know, 10 years in a city and not have to necessarily interact with someone whose life may look and seem very different from them. And I sometimes try and talk about not only the message of wanted to do something because it's, say, the right thing to do, because you should give back in some way and you should be participating in your community, but like what it is that you might get on an individual level that's perhaps something to do with your own personal kind of, like, for me, it's something that I've realized over the work that I've done and the more people that I've met, that when I first started going out and doing what I'm doing, and the more I'd give haircuts, like what began in London took me to staying with friends I used to know, because I used to play music before. And what I do is I as I said, like, I quit. So I was working in the salon, but I ended up quitting my job after a few months to follow this and pursue this. And I was working in bars and cafes to try and pay the rent still, but I followed my nose with it, and I went to new cities, and wherever I'd go, there was like this group of compassionate, awesome people doing things, as you said, like the groundwork stuff, like trying to galvanize other people to get involved. And then you'd have this really opposing view where people would not necessarily turn their nose up, but there's this kind of dehumanizing this group of people and putting it down to bad choices, putting it down to mistakes they've made. And if they only pulled up the socks and you know, put more effort in, they'd be able to benefit themselves. So I'd like to touch on like that side of the perception of that it's people could just try harder. And also of course, like for me, that elephant in the room that I like to address whenever I'm giving a talk or addressing this is drugs and alcohol, and obviously you've got mental health issues. So there's this kind of image that's quite a strong image surrounding sometimes people who are living out in the elements. I'd love to know, like, kind of whether you run into those barriers, and then I can touch on my experiences with those too. Like when you're talking to people outside of the circle of like the community caregivers who are doing this stuff, like whether you run into those kind of stigmas and those stereotypes yourself.
Yeah, no, definitely. That's a great question. As we know, unfortunately, homelessness is always surrounded with a negative stigma, and that's where I try to create the change. A lot of times we get volunteers. We go out every other Sunday, and I've had thousands of volunteers over the years. But I'll ask them, "Oh, what do you feel about going out?" And it's always I think it's fear and the unknown. I think they said, "Oh, these guys are all drug addicts. I'm scared they're going to attack me, this and that." And I said, "Okay, this is the question I'm going to ask you at 9 a.m, because we're going to take off right now and you've never done this. At 3 o'clock, I'm going to ask you the same question and tell me what was your, perception of the day." And it never fails. At the end, they're like, "Wow, that was just a humbling experience." And these people were so genuinely nice. They're hugging us and saying, "Thank you, Paul and Paulie's project." And, it's that connection, that relationship, and just having that compassion. And I think again, it's the unknown for people. I think they don't really know. And once they come out, I say, these are human beings. This isn't an animal on the side of the road, So sometimes, it's just saying hello if you don't have the means to give, or just start breaking conversation. It's just the little things. You always hear that, quote, it's act of kindness is free, but it's just so true. And once people start going out with us, they get hooked and they come out every Sunday, and they just, it's awesome to see.
Honestly, man, and from lived experience myself coming out with you guys, it's really, and I put that in the book, because Paulie is, Paul, like I've come out with you and Paulie's project like quite a few times now, and I made sure that you guys were in here in this chapter about LA. And there's a couple of people that I've met, or family that I've met, and who are living in Skid Row, who we know as well, who we'll talk about later. But I've really experienced what you're saying, which is that. When I've gone out with new people with you as well, you can tell people there is that kind of nervousness before someone might go out. And I think it's exactly what you're saying. It's that fear of the unknown, that all you have to do sometimes is spend a day. And I mean, what's a day? What's a few hours? It might just be a morning or an afternoon. But I've experienced the same thing, which is, you just have to listen. And what you're saying about the little things is like, that applies to giving yourself and like those moments and giving your time, but it's also those little things that it might just be those nuances in someone's life that you can relate to. From the outside, you really have very little chance of being able to build a bridge of empathy to understand someone else's life without just talking to them. It's one of the most like simple but available tools to all of us, which I want to say is not always easy. Like, I get it, because some people are a bit more extroverted, some people are more introvert, and obviously I'm like you, man, which is like, I've always done these people interpersonal jobs, and like I like to think that that's kind of one of my skills of like getting out there and talking to people. But I understand that for some people that's not that easy. So I always say to people, like, to try and give advice, I'm like, honestly, when I started doing what I'm doing, like, my mind within the first like couple months of doing this, I think it just broadens your parameters of what this thing is and why people end up experiencing homelessness and living on the street. Because I had this image of homelessness before, and I'm going to get completely real here, where that word to me related to this old man with a beard and a bottle in his hand. And like, words, sometimes there are quite strong images attached to them. And I had to peel back those layers of like conditioning to like what information I'd received up to that point in my life about this issue. And I thought myself as an empathetic person before. I wanted to I gave a shit about this thing, but I wasn't interacting with it. And I think it's just, as soon as I started going out and doing this, it's like I was meeting people who had that business 5 years ago, had a family, had everything like from the outside, like really like in check, and really like trying to do everything they can to better their life. And then I also met people who just grew up in the wrong neighborhood and grew up fighting to survive since the very beginning. And they didn't have that support network. But of course, there's all those things in between. And I just feel that to address that point that you're saying, the fear of the unknown, the antidote to that is trying to get to know it a bit better. And like, I think that doesn't have to be this really scary thing. You've got to just, the great thing that I think you provide, man, is like you provide a hosting platform, which is what sometimes people need to be able to say, let's meet up together as a crew. We're going to take our cars down. We're going to take some bits. I was going to say bits and bobs. Then that's probably not going to relate all that well to an American audience. You take you take some bits out with you, and you go, yeah, we're just going to play out a worst case scenario here, which I try and also do. The work is like I get into. I go, okay, well, if I approach someone and I say, hi, how are you? And like, hey, what's up? And offer a smile. What's the worst case scenario? And when you play that out, like that's never looked that bad for me. It might be someone who's in a bad way who says, nah, like I don't want to talk to you right now, but that's it. You move on, and like that's like life. Sometimes I often say, like, God, I have days when I don't want to talk to anyone. So
definitely.
I think that fears what you're saying is really, really important. And have you found that through those days that you've had out with certain people who are new to this, does that give you hope in some way to see the way that can transition, that perception of this whole issue for someone within like a short space of time?
Oh yeah, no, definitely. I mean, it's just such a good feeling inside, because I've had people, volunteers that have come with our program, and all of a sudden they're, with years under with us, now they branched out and started their own. I mean, I probably know 10 people off the top of my head, and then now they got a group, and then theirs is growing. It's almost like a ripple effect, but it just starts with one. And like you said, I think, going back to your first comment, when you were talking about, the old man with the bottle and living in the alley and all that, I think that's how a lot of people see it with homelessness, is the old man pushing the shopping cart. It is completely changed, especially with the pandemic now. There's a lot of families, the younger generations, they're living in the cars all over the place. And I think that's the biggest thing, is just to be non-judgmental. Everybody has a different scenario. I was talking to a gentleman, I always share this story, a few months ago, and he's like, Paul, I was just like you a few months ago. And I was like, well, what do you mean? And he said, well, I had a good job. I was a chef. I was married, had a big house, everything. He said, life happens. I got a divorce. So unfortunately, my wife got the house. I lost the kids. So now I rented an apartment. I'm still a chef. But he said the owner of the restaurant sold it. So now he's out of job. So now he lost the apartment. And now he said, now I ended up in Skid Row because I have zero income and all my family's back east. I have nobody. So he said, what happened? I never drank, did drugs, but when you're out in Skid Row, it's like you have to become numb to the environment. Everything you think of, it's 100 times worse. It's scary. There's people getting, mugged and raped and stabbed and everything. So he said, I started drinking, Then one day somebody said, hey, let's have some marijuana. Started smoking some weed. And he's all, next thing you know, I'm a full-blown heroin addict, And when people say, you chose this life, he said, I didn't choose this life, choose this life. It just happened. But I want to get fixed and get out of it. But I can see where somebody's life, spiral out of control really quick, So I just want to be there to uplift. The world has enough critics in the world, we got to do what we can to help others.
Yeah, man, I'm really with that. And the reason for that is you do have to make that, for me, the biggest transition that I try and talk about, which you've just hit the nail on the head, really, which is like the whole ethos would do something for nothing, is, look, there are skills that someone might have that are quite specific to be able to help someone. You might be someone who has like these tangible skills, like it's cool that I can go out and cut hair, but after all, a haircut grows out. It's like, it's about that time and that conversation. But there's plenty of people who might have individual skills to help people. But one thing I try and talk about is that transition in you that we're talking about here, which is like, you got to make a choice, which is like, I know this stuff isn't easy sometimes, and the idea of walking by may seem easier, but I think we all have that curiosity inside us, that person who walks past and thinks, or drives through somewhere like Skid Row and thinks like, as you mentioned earlier, like, this shouldn't be normal. Like, this isn't something that we should perceive as like normal in a city with such affluence, with such, with such prosperity and like success in so many fields, that there's so many people falling down the wayside here because like, I think all of us have this undercurrent, I suppose, this not okay feeling that like, this is how we treat the most vulnerable in our city, because it's a fear that whether we like it or not, I think it's a subconscious fear, because it's like, if I do end up there, no matter how many times you might tell yourself that you might not, like that's my fate. Is like is so I think what you need to do, for me, I was think, well, that personal transition that you go through to be able to try and see this a different way, for me, that's as big as the bigger change, because like the more people who that switches for, I think that changes perception on a ground level that I think can swell up to be able to push for more urgent compassion from the powers that be. And also another point to make is what we're touching on here is, you know, that anecdote which was really powerful that you said about someone you met recently, and in his spiral and ending up kind of becoming someone who was battling addiction on the street. It's like that, you know, only if you try hard, American dream kind of, if you want it enough, you can get it. Like the reason why that falls down is we're becoming so much more aware of each other's mental health, and there's a economical spiral and you know, like a material kind of like there's the discomfort of not having comfort, you know, like the material things that we need around us to like have a happy, safe life and a home to live in. But the psychological battle that we all go through, you know, I can attest to that. I know that we've spoken openly before about like through doing this work and how much you have to give your time to so many places that some days you're not okay either, man. And I think that we are all aware now that this conversation is becoming more popular. So I really hope, and I feel that I'm trying to, and within this book as well, exploring the themes underneath this issue, I think of those human things we can all relate to, that we can all relate to what pain feels like when something bad happens to us, and the emotional spiral and the kind of the things that happen in your life where you need to have objectivity, you need someone else there to rely on. And I think this whole thing that, you know, we're speaking about here, whether that be kind of mental health issues or like drug and alcohol abuse, it's like everyone I meet, you know, whether that be in Skid Row or around cities in Europe or elsewhere, it's like there's usually something underneath there where there's some pain that's been unaddressed and they're trying to mask something, or as you said, their surroundings. So it's a really big part of this conversation, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, I think like you said, I mean, the human connection is everything. You know, a lot of times when I talk to my homeless friends, they said, Paul, the hardest part of homelessness is loneliness. We get drive by cars all week. You're the only one that gets out of the car and says, hey, John, how you doing? And you hug us. You actually care, you know. We just wish there was more people like you, you know. So, yeah, I think it's just trying to save humanity. It's not really that hard. It's just going out, smiling, shaking somebody's hand. You know, I think people think, they overthink. I got to feed 1,000. Just start with one, you know, buy him a coffee, do something, you know. I think that's when I really, you know, earned, and I could say it, I earned respect in the streets. When I started Polish Project, I went out for 2 years by myself, and I went at night. It's a very dangerous situation, you know, going in these back alleys under freeway encampments, and they'd come up to me, what's your problem? What are you doing down here? Are you an undercover cop? You know, nobody in their right mind is coming in these dark streets at 12 o'clock. You know, and let's get real. It has to do with race stuff too. I'm Mexican, predominantly going in black areas. That's just rough by itself, you know. And I said, you know what? If I want to dive into homelessness and help you guys, I'm going to be out here any time of the day and learn. And I want you guys to share with me, how can I help? What can I do to be of service? And it took a few months, but after that, you know, they shook my hand and said, we respect you. You're the real deal. You know, not many people come out here and do this. So when I laid the groundwork for Polish Project, and I have these volunteers, and they said, man, these people love you out here. And I said, well, that's because I put in the work. You know, I came out here and got the respect and trust and built relationships from the ground up, literally. And that's how I think we've had a successful program.
Yeah. And that, you know, it's important, really important to I suppose, accept the challenge of that, isn't it? Which is, you can't just rock up one day and there's some soundtrack playing and that's your do good and bit for the month, and then you put it on Instagram and that's that. And obviously we do talk about this stuff online. We do use social media to try and amplify these messages. But I think the most important part of that is the storytelling, and to be able to like tell a new story to people from the outside seeing this, to try and create that kind of you know, that kind of, I guess, that mentality of like more people getting out there and doing these things. And for me, that's why I feel like through anything you do, there's also another opportunity available, which is telling a new story surrounding any of the issues we face in the world, you know. So you could measure your own impact on a personal level. You could measure it in the organization that you run. And of course, numbers are important for that stuff. But I always urge that, you know, most of the bad stuff that's happened in the world, and to be honest, most of the divisive kind of shouting each other down on the internet or shouting each other down on news channels. I mean, God, don't get sick of watching the news where you just see one talking head and another one, and here we go, I'm going to watch this and watch two people not get anywhere in this conversation, and then it will be put on YouTube with this word, someone destroys someone, and you can watch it later. But my point is, like, it's like we're living in this time where telling the wrong story really creates such a bad energy, and throughout history, it's telling the wrong story has created all kinds of terrible things. So you got to believe in the power of retelling a story in a way that people can see it differently. And I think through the work that you do and the way that you broadcast that online, I think it's like, it does come with the challenge. It does come with the real side of this. But I think people want that, you know, like it's not always easy. You know what you're saying? It's like, this isn't always easy. Like, you did have to rock up. You did have to build that trust. And I think that in some ways can sound like, oh, wow, okay, I really got to dedicate myself here. But what you're going to get in return is you're going to get something that's getting to know people outside of your immediate circle, who become friends, you know, who become people who are like, you build trust with people. You know, there's people in this book who I've remained friends with. And obviously it's not always that easy because, you know, like, it's a transient nature. Like, people lose phones, people like skip towns and move somewhere else. But I try and keep in touch with people. I try and help people out beyond that. And I've got people in my life, as I know you have now, who it becomes less about the have and the have not. And of course, I'm in a privileged position to be able to say that and say, like, you know, I have a certain amount of privilege to be able to come and like stay inside each night and keep doing what I'm doing. But to try and remove this interaction from being I have and you don't, because the way that usually goes is, you don't want to make someone always feel like a charity case. Like, there's someone in this book, Nathan, right, who I met in Brisbane in Australia, and he says it really beautifully. I don't know if I can find his page, but I know it pretty much anyway, because you know, it's ingrained in my mind. And he talks about sympathy and empathy, which is, he says, like, you know, I don't need sympathy from people, like, because it's a useless emotion to me. It's like, it doesn't do me any good. It doesn't like, and basically his sentiment is like, being pitied, like, and having pity is like, I know sometimes it's our natural reaction, like we feel sorry for someone, but trying to just step one foot on that bridge of empathy for someone, putting your hands up and going, you know what, man, I don't know what it's like. You know, I don't know what it's like, but I'm going to try and like think about how I can sort of like connect with you there on a level, rather than being like, oh, poor you, like, that really sucks for you. Because, you know, I wouldn't want that, would you? You know?
No, and sometimes I get that in my personal life, you know, with Paulie, you know, sometimes, you know, and I use Instagram to share our journeys, the goods, the bads, and all that stuff. And, you know, I think our story with Paulie's project's widespread. You know, it's like, I could talk about the homeless stuff, but I could also talk about my everyday life with my son. And sometimes you know, I just hate that saying, like, oh, I feel sorry for you or whatever. It's like, I'm not really asking for pity. I just, you know, for me, if you could just text me once in a while, hey, Paul, how are you and Paulie doing? That lifts up my spirits, because nobody knows what kind of night I had behind closed doors. Paulie wet his bed. Paulie vomited. I got to give him a shower at 2 a.m, give him his medication, make sure he doesn't have a meltdown. He'll bite me, punch me, kick me. I mean, I can cry the blues, but I don't use that, my platform for that tool. I do share some experiences to let other parents know they're not alone, you know, and I've had a huge network, because let's face it, Paulie's a rare case. Most people are blind or autistic, but he's both. And with me sharing our story, I've connected with people like in Miami, in Texas, in New York, and wow, our son or daughter is blind and autistic too. So it's been cool to communicate and have this community that I've built, where we can share ideas, or they'll, you know, and text me in the middle of the night, and I just let them know what I've been through, and it's amazing.
I love that. Honestly, I love that. And I'm grateful for that, because that's how we met. Like, that's how I first got introduced to you. And like, we've made this, you know, and that's an important part of this conversation, is like, so when I began the work that I was doing, like cutting hair, like, as I said, it took me from place to place. And what I started doing was posting these before and after photos of people. And sometimes they come out, you know, like with this big transformation, which is beautiful, because you've got someone who might not been clean, you know, had a haircut and been able to go into a salon, or even had a shower for a while. So you might have this big transition, but sometimes it's not like that. And either way, what I do is I post the story, and the idea was to hopefully like put a signpost up on Instagram where people could stop for a minute and see someone a bit outside of their circle, and then read on to their story. And this started to resonate with other people online. And I think I really found what you're saying now, which was like the positive aspects of what can be sometimes a very negative, kind of difficult place to navigate, which can be, you know, social media. And I found that this thing, when you use it for a certain message, actually it has some real plus points, and you start connecting with people on a level that, and especially during the pandemic, like that, I've kept in touch with people. I'm so thankful for like a lot of these tools we have. It's just about sometimes using them the right way. And do something for nothing was the hashtag I'd always use at the end of each post to say, okay, well, I realized quite quickly that these stories I was hearing, this is just this human conversation I wanted to have, and other people picked it up and used it in their own way. And, you know, whether that was, you know, some people giving haircuts, but, you know, whether it was yoga teachers, and like, I remember there was this yoga teacher who went and volunteered at a rehabilitation center, or there was like younger people going in to have lunch with senior citizens who didn't have any family. Like, homelessness is one part of this conversation, but I think underneath it is also just like trying to realize that you don't have to do everything, as you mentioned earlier, but it's important to participate with people outside of your normal circle. And I think that it's a two-way, it's a symbiotic interaction that I think you really get something out of yourself. And to be really honest, like that really flicks that switch from feeling what I used to feel before, which was when I scrolled through social media on my Twitter feed and spent like an hour there reading different articles. Sometimes I'd come away feeling almost like stuck to my sofa, like fatigued by it all. I'd be like, holy shit, like I can't do anything. The world's fucked. And like honestly, that isn't the reality. The reality is like you can step out into the world and be whoever you want to be each day. And like I think, you know, when you start not thinking so much about the likes and the comments for you in a personal way, but to resonate, I like to amplify someone else's life and these stories, like the whole thing changes a lot.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, no, I think just, you know, in my situation, you know, I could be a real negative person. I mean, if you think of what I go through with my son, and then I drop him off, and then I go to Skid Row. I mean, I could come home at night and like, oh my God, like, you know, the other day, oh no, not the other day, it was months ago, and Paulie had a meltdown, you know, and he's, you know, hitting himself, and he gets very aggressive and violent. I mean, he can hurt himself and hurt me at the same time. And
because he's a man. He's grown.
He's I mean, I can't imagine, right? You can't see and talk, and you're just a strong guy. And you know, maybe I give him a hamburger, but he wants a taco, and he'll and slam the table and all that, you know. So I dropped him off at mom's house, and I'm just like, wow. And then I went to Skid Row, and then a lady was telling me that she got, you know, jumped and raped, and then my other friend, I found out he got stabbed. Anyways, it's a lot to consume. So I come home, it takes me like 2 hours to decompress. You know, long day with my son, long day in the streets. And I talked to my friend, Tony, and he just said, you know, I don't know what I'm doing life, Paul. I can't pay my Sprint bill, and I'm so mad about. I said, dude, that's your worst complaint, is paying that phone bill? Like, that's going to get done, bro. You know, people are going through permanent problems, and it's not to demean or make, you know, his issues sound like anything, but it just, you know, gives you a different perspective in life. And, you know, like I'll talk to my friends, and, you know, oh, my friend didn't make All-Stars or my son didn't make All-Stars for basketball, or my son didn't get straight A's. And I said, you know what, you know, and I try to use Paulie as an example. Like, you know what I would give, you know, for my son to see or read a book or throw the ball, or, you know, so appreciate, he didn't get straight A's, but hey, at least your son can read and walk and talk and all that stuff. So, I think we just have to humble ourselves, you know.
I think I know, you know, I see perspective is everything sometimes, isn't it? And it can really do enough to hopefully just not your own head. That's why it's important to share. And I have a lot of respect for that, man, and for you and the work you do. And I think, like, you know, it's really hopeful for me, because being connected with similar people, it's like you're opened up to this world where, look, for me, do something for nothing. Like, this is just 4 words. That's something that exists in all of us, and it's, for me, it's just setting a little reminder, the same as the work that you do. It's one and the same, which is like, we wouldn't have got where we got right now through years, thousands of years. We've been walking this, you know, millions of years been walking this planet. It's like we had to share to survive, and we used tribes where we all had a role, and we all had kind of course, a lot more struggle in many ways. But I think now what we've got is we've got this amazing things alive, these amazing materials that we have around us. Of course, like there's we know there's ways that we could live better using these things. And what I'd like to, I guess, put out there is that, like, you know, now we live in these kind of societies where we're walking around and you can go a whole day living in a big city without talking to one person. So it's like,
Yeah.
no wonder some of us are so isolated. And as you mentioned earlier, to sort of wrap things up as well, like through the pandemic and what we experience now, like we all know what it's like to feel really isolated. And for the first time, some people, if you were lucky enough to lock down and be in home, like to feel like how important those like small interactions each day that we have with one another, those like small things that I honestly, man, and I know you do, like I put such value on them. And I think it is, as you said, it's about humbling ourselves to like remember that those things can be enough sometimes to stop someone like on the way when they were going to like top themselves. Spoke to people who were literally, not me personally, but I've heard stories of like people who like, you know, they were like, this was like going to be like the last day. They were on like the last, the hope ran out. You know, someone coming in there just to have that conversation and recognize them as a human being again in this moment, and just listening. Like I'll never put a high enough value on that. And of course, I won't change, and I know you do. And to be able to like have more affordable housing and the systemic change that needs to happen, like you know, I could go on a whole other conversation now about like how things are looking in the UK politically with homelessness. I try and keep it simple, and especially with the message of this book, is you know, what you've got in here is you've got a bunch of people I met, but I didn't organize these and shuffle them to be like, here's the best people I've met, broadcast this kind of like ideal message about what you need to hear. These are just people I met in the run up to creating this book at random. And within the men, women, and some young women there, like, you know, there's these messages that I'm telling you, like, we can all relate to. And I think having this human conversation for me is what I'm really interested in, what's really important. So what I'd like to do, Paul, is like, first of all, ask you that question. I'd like to read just a brief paragraph from a family that Adam, Tiffany, and Brandon, who we both know, who live on the streets of Skid Row. Now they're in actually like a trailer RV thing now, I believe. I've had some updates from Adam. So I'd like to read a few of his words. But first of all, I suppose I would like to ask you, and no pressure because it's not like, you know, $1 million question or whatever, but it's like, what would you say to like, I suppose, all of those people who are thinking like, you know, I mean, how many people in LA like just, you know, see people who are living on the street in these tent encampments as a nuisance or as a problem or as people who we just want to clean up and move on because they're really making the place look too pretty. Like, why does it benefit those people who feel that way about this to try and change their perception? Like for you, like why does it benefit to them on a personal level to want to be able to like interact with this a better way?
You mean as far as like your average person who has that negative stigma, or like how
who
do
has that negativity? The naysayers, like what's the benefit for them to like try and get involved or see this way, you know?
Yeah, well, I think where help starts is creating that relationship. You know, I know the city's trying to come in with all these people in, you know, yellow vests with clipboards saying, hey, we're trying to get you housing. But, you know, a lot of our homeless friends have been broken. They've been hurt and they don't trust you, and they're not going to give you all their information. But starting at the groundworks with somebody like me or people who are out there in the streets, they will open to us. So I think it's you can't just throw everybody in a box and say, let's ship them off. It starts at the ground. You got to get to know them. What's your name? You know, so there can be help, and there are, you know, I think people always think of the negative, but there's so many success stories. I can tell you that I've gotten a lot of people off the streets, taking them to Dodger games. There's a lot of fun things we've done. I got my friend a drum set, or I've seen so many people that have given up hope on life and like they want to kill themselves. And, you know, just working with them slowly but surely, now they're in an apartment, you know. So I think from it's a community effort. We can't leave it. That's all I hear, people complaining about politicians and the money, and obviously all that's a part of it. We need more affordable housing, but it starts with a person in the mirror. You know, what can you do instead of pointing the finger? You know, you can go give somebody lunch. How you doing? That might, you know, change their whole day. Well, when you change your day, you change your perspective on life. Maybe you just change that person's whole mindset, and now they're like, I matter, I care, and it uplifts them, you know. So I'm telling you, it's baby steps. People overthink it, you know. We just have to humanize.
Honestly, yeah, I agree. I think back to someone I remember equally, like somebody who I remember he'd got he'd got his highest point in like his career as his job where he could reach, and he had the nice car and the nice house. To a lot of people in similar situations, you can, like, whatever your version of success is in your life, like this isn't about not pursuing whatever your version of like being here on this earth is, as far as like, you know, being successful. But this is, for me, I've heard it described before as like, there's another cup that you got to be aware of that you got to fill up here. And I think that participating in this way with other people, it's okay to reckon that you're going to feel like your days start to become slightly different, and that actually there's a purpose there that I think that we have to be honest with ourselves and realize that, like, I think when you start participating this way in your community and you start kind of looking out for people and trying to be aware, and of course that's not all the time, because like, look, we know people are trying to look after their family, feed their kids, like pay this, like we've all got our own version of what our life is. But when you're presented with the opportunity, to see someone either with curiosity and listening and finding out a bit more of the story, or, you know, putting them in your mind into that kind of box where, like, you know, that's the choice. I always say to people, look, there's a cup there that you're going to start to fill up where, it's going to benefit you as well, you know?
Well, I think, like I said, people kind of overthink, you know, or, you know, I have some people are like, Paul, I just can't do what you do. I can't come to the streets. It's just too much for me. And I said, we can all help in some way. You know, maybe you're not the person that can volunteer, but maybe you can donate, you know, behind the scenes, or maybe you know somebody that can help us, or, you know, maybe you could just pray for it. There's always some little thing that you can do, but, you know, kind of, and again, nobody's keeping score like, oh, I did more than you did, whatever. You know, it's just, it's the little things, man. I'm telling you, it's just, it makes a huge difference.
Yeah, man. Well, I really genuinely now, you know, I appreciate you very much for the work you do, for keeping at it, for having me and showing me kind of the ropes and the way things are over there. LA's been a place where, you know, it's featured within the book. Some stories are featured like in here, but there's many places that are in here. And, you know, LA, whenever I come, I always give you a call, and we're always back. I hope one day in the future, you know, when we can move around the world a bit easier, I'll be over there. But the truth be told, this is about you and where you are. You know, this is about, you know, for me, do something is like, sometimes people do message me and say, hey, how can I get involved in this? You know, as far as like, is there some pack I can like send you to like get you on your way? And I'm like, honestly, like the best thing is to go anywhere else, but like look around, like, you know, your local area, like your kind of street, like get involved in things locally, because that's kind of where you know, you're not going to have to go too far to, I think, see people who might need that. And sometimes it's not all that obvious and not all that visible, is it? But but, you know, the tents and the people that you see on Skid Row, like, I remember, so this family, Adam, Tiffany, and Brandon, I remember I knocked on their tent and I sort of said, when with you guys, we went out on a give, first of all, where you guys we had parked up, and we had cars open with like pizza and some water. And as I put in here, one of the most commodities down there, which is sometimes blue top, you know, the tarpaulin that keeps people kind of dry and protected when their tents aren't doing it. So they would invite me in to see them the next day. I spent some time with this family, and they couldn't have been more welcoming and more giving. They couldn't have been more hosting and hospitable to like me, a stranger, coming into their house, their tent. I knew if I needed to, I could have stayed there that night. And I think sometimes as well, you know, it's even harder because you've got all these tents. It's so important to get to know the humans underneath. And I was lucky enough to be able to spend a lot of time with them, go back and visit them. And it always stayed with me. One thing that Adam said, we took a walk. I cut his hair. I spent some time with him and his family, and we took a walk down the street to catch up. And I said, what is it that keeps you going, man? Because, you know, I mean, obviously I know you've got your family, and there was a lot of love there between them, and they were really looking out for one another. But, you know, they were still in quite a vulnerable position. They were underneath a kind of an underpass, you know, and kind of like, you know, they were still in quite a tricky place. And I'll read what he said, which is this. It could be worse. You know what I mean? I could be on the goddamn street with no pillow, no blanket, no family, nobody to give a shit if I die. It could be so much worse. As long as you've got just one person in there to help you out, to let you know that you're worth something, it's worth keeping your head above water. And that's what they do for me. Just being in their presence lets me know I'm worth something, and I'm worth being loved, and that I've got something worth giving to them. They love me, and I love them to death. And it always stays with me, that moment, because it resonates
That's
and hammers
that's
home.
powerful.
Yeah, man. And I think our conversation, to sort of finish it up now, is like, if there's one message that I'd like people to take from this book, if there's one message I know that you'd like people to take from everything that you're doing with Paul's project, it's just like, recognize your value as an individual, to go out there and positively affect the life of another person. And that's it in a nutshell.
Yeah, no, definitely. No, I just, want to throw it back on you that I know you build me up and say, Paul, you inspire me, but dude, your story honestly motivates me. Your travels, I've followed you for a while, and people like me, we give so much, but sometimes we need to receive it. So I have you and a circle of friends that really inspire me. So I just want to say, man, you're amazing, and please, please, please go get this book, read it. It was funny. I was showing my mom yesterday in your story, and she loved your title. She says, "That's it. That's in a nutshell," And yeah, man, you're amazing, and yeah, man, we, like they say, the older you get, we what is the saying? You are who you hang around, I guess you could say. So I just want to thank you for being you.
Well, mate, thank you very much for this network that we've kind of created slowly through different people we know. And yeah, I'd like to say, again, thanks for that. Thanks for Book Soup for hosting this event.
Yeah.
Huge thanks to Akasha Publishers in America, because from the very start they've been incredibly supportive of this message. Yeah, I guess in these pages, you've not only got people that I hope you'll get to know, this stigma that we've been talking about today, like real lives, but also 100% of my proceeds are going to future not-for-profit art shows. So like the publishers have donated £1 per sale or $1 sale. So, there's an element of this that's going back to the people who need it. So thank you very much.
Awesome.
Thank you. And that's a wrap on our presentation. Thank you again to our guests and to all of you who tuned in this evening. We greatly appreciate everyone's time and support of independent bookstores. Support our bookstore and our authors and purchase a copy of tonight's featured book. Just click the green purchase button that reads "Do Something for Nothing" directly below the viewer screen. If you'd like regular updates on our upcoming events, make sure to follow us on Crowdcast and subscribe to our newsletter. Have a great evening and stay safe, everyone. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you guys. Bye-bye.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.